Hello, everybody. We'll get started in just a minute. We'll just let everybody come in at the top of the hour and then we'll get going. I do see a lot of people coming in right now, so we'll just give it another 30 seconds or so and then I'll start the introductions. Okay, we do have a packed agenda, so I'm going to get going. My name is Andy Jordan. I am the president of Refensing Consulting, and I will introduce everybody else in just a little while. But first of all, welcome to our PPM power session, Maximize Adaptability and Minimize Risk with Hybrid Project Management. We're going to get started in just a second with a couple of little admin points, and then we'll get right into the content. First off, this session is being recorded, so if you want to play back anything or if you want to sort of get a colleague to listen in, then you'll get a link afterwards to access the recording. And we're also going to be sending you a copy of the slides. The same email will give you details of how to access that. There will be time for questions at the end, so if you have any questions as our panelists are discussing the topic, please feel free to put those into the GoToWebinar panel, and we will get to as many of them as we can before the top of the hour. There is also going to be a PDU available for this session, and I'll give you the details of that at the end. And then finally, just one quick apology. We are not able to activate the videos today. GoToWebinar is having a little bit of a technical issue, so none of our videos are actually working. So I'm sorry, we are audio only right now. In my case, that's probably a good thing. For everybody else, it's a little bit of a disappointment. But there we go. All right, so let's get on with the real meat of this presentation. So Lauren, I'll get you to go to the next slide, please. There we go. All right. I'm the guy on the left. I'll introduce everybody else in just a second, but first off, let me just give you a little bit of context for this. There's a recent survey that was carried out by Smartsheet, who we're presenting this webinar in, and they found that 42% of project and portfolio management professionals who responded to their survey use a combination of lean, waterfall, and agile methodologies to make sure that they're able to tailor their project management approaches to their own very unique needs and each individual circumstance. And that seemed a really high number to me. So that's sort of really what's led to this discussion now on hybrid. So with that said, I'll have the panelists introduce themselves. And Alexis, you're on the left, so let's start with you. Ladies first.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. My name is Alexis Felton. I'm a senior solutions specialist at Smartsheet, which is a lot of alliteration. My specialty is project and program and portfolio management. I've been extremely passionate about this space for the past 12 or so years. I have done the work. I started as an IT project manager, and then I grew into a global program manager, and then capped my project management career as a global portfolio leader. And now I get to do things like this, where I talk to the project and program management community about what's happening in our discipline and best practices for optimizing your solutions. So I'm super excited to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Alexis. Jeremiah?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremiah Roberts. I work at Delta Airlines, specifically in the Tech Ops or Technical Operations Division. Tech Ops, if you're not familiar, we provide aircraft care for both the Delta fleet and also engine and component and line maintenance support for customers around the world. I'm a quality engineer and continuous improvement manager here. My team focuses on the engine maintenance area, and we do process improvement, industrial engineering work, defect analysis, and project management. Have a military background, mostly in operations, Lean Six Sigma background, and yeah, Lean is where we focus most of our hybrid PPM efforts.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Frank?
Thank you. My name is Frank Chiacco, and I'm the director of the Program Management Office at Securitas North America. And I am going to read this next part because I don't want to leave anything out. We do a lot of stuff. We provide intelligent, protective, and security solutions, including on-site, mobile, and remote guarding, electronic security, fire and safety services, and enterprise risk management. So we've got a full boat. There's a lot going on. In my role, I'm responsible for project governance, making sure our projects align with strategic goals and that they're executed efficiently. I've worked in the project management field for many years, more than I'd like to admit, and across many industries, mostly setting up PMOs.
Excellent. Thanks, Frank. And last but not least, the man with an excellent haircut, Will.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everybody. I'm Will Jeffords, and I work at Swamp Fox Technologies. We build software for large enterprise contact centers and customer experiences that they deliver. We offer a mix of software products and services to fit the needs of those customers. And my role is basically I'm the head of business operations at Swamp Fox, and that spans finance, compliance, contracts, HR, people processes, and our PMO. So I'm looking at everything that's not actual software engineering and relating it to the processes and the data that we use to manage the business.
Thanks, Will. Sounds like you've got a puppy you're volunteering to help out as well. All right, so let's get straight into our first discussion questions. We do have a lot of things to try and cover here. So panelists, can you talk through some of the key differences between the more traditional project management methodologies that probably most of us are more familiar with versus this growing hybrid approach? And Frank, let's start with you.
Thank you. Well, first off, I think all methodologies are valuable, and the one you choose ultimately depends on the type of project you're running. But the main difference, the one that I think everybody's familiar with, is that Waterfall delivers one big thing all at once. Agile delivers smaller things over time, and hybrid is a blend of the two. Another key difference is that pure Waterfall works better in a matrix environment where you don't have dedicated resources, while pure Agile requires dedicated small teams in order to work properly because of how quickly you're delivering. Hybrid allows you to use the best parts of both, Waterfall and Agile, if you have the ability to at least partially dedicate resources. For example, you can build sprints into your schedule to deliver pieces of the project for users to demo, test, or get familiar with the system a little bit earlier. And this is the Agile part. Then you can do an end-to-end test when the sprints are complete to make sure that it's ready for prime time prior to a final delivery. And that's more the Waterfall part.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Jeremiah, your thoughts?
I definitely agree with Frank on this one. One thing I would maybe say about traditional or waterfall project management is that it's easier than hybrid to pick up the pieces of a project if you haven't been working on it for a while and keep pressing forward towards progress. So like if you have multiple projects, waterfall management is easier, I would say, to press pause and play. And it's easier to report progress with clear gating or milestones, things like that. What I've found though is that especially in my role, we have quite a bit of scope creep often when we use waterfall. And if you're not careful, that can get out of hand. And even, waterfall projects can result in maybe less customized or maybe less robust solutions than hybrid or lean or something like that. A big ongoing effort here at Delta Tech Ops is integrating lean methodology into a lot of things we do. And besides just like natural resistance to change, lean, it really requires super dedicated effort. And I would say it's really hard to do multiple lean projects at once. When you're in a lean project, you're all in. One thing that, one of the quotes I like from Albert Einstein, he says, if he had an hour to work on a project, he'd spend the first 55 minutes looking at the problem and understanding it in depth, and then only that 5 minutes at the back end to focus on a solution. So understanding the kind of the recursive focus on defining the problem and then getting into the design, I think is one of the superpowers of hybrid. You can really have those robust sprints um, followed on by the waterfall type methodology. So we're trying to move that way here at Delta.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Will, I know it's unfair to ask you to follow Albert Einstein, but can you follow Albert Einstein?
Well, I'll just say I agree with what both Frank and Jeremiah had to say about the attributes, the characteristics of the different approaches to project management that everybody's considering both individually and then when you get into the world of hybrid. And I'll just use SwampFox as an example of how you can see that play out because I think it's probably not completely uncommon even in different industries. But for us as a software company, that's doing a lot of professional services work also, we have this paradox of needing both waterfall and scrum. But in each case, a need for the other has driven us to adopt a hybrid approach. And so what I mean by that is in our professional services engagements that are fixed bid scoped projects, we really have to use a waterfall approach so that we can meet that heavy weighting on the iron triangle of project management towards time and schedule. But we're finding ourselves in those situations with customers who themselves are starting to adapt agile processes and they want us to fit into it. So it's an ironic thing that we have to kind of move towards understanding both in those engagements. And then on the product development side, we really have evolved to take advantage of all the things that Frank and Jeremiah were describing for a Scrum approach, but we need to have a stage gate waterfall overlay on top of that so that we can hit certain critical time driven milestones for the business. So we're finding ourselves using both in that situation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Alexis, I'll give you another word on this one.
Awesome. I echo everything that's already been stated, but the one thing that I'll add is when we think about hybrid as being waterfall and agile, one of the things that I like to remind people is that agile is actually a discipline and a mindset. And then there's methodologies within that discipline. So the agile methodologies being Scrum or Kanban or extreme programming. And it's really important that people are bought into whatever agile methodology that you're using as a mindset first, in order to make that blend of hybrid and insert agile methodology here successful.
Excellent. Thank you. Will, you had
Yeah,
another thought on that one?
yeah, I did. I want to say that what Alexis is a great point because we find ourselves always calibrating the shared organizational understanding of our particular brand of agile philosophy. Because when you're doing whatever it is that you're doing in your hybrid or iterative approach, you're necessarily, needing to morph a little bit of that, and communication around that and working with your people is key. So yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Just a quick aside before we get into the next discussion topic. I see a lot of people are attending this webinar. Some of them joined a couple of minutes late. So in case you missed it, we apologize that there's no video on for this one, but unfortunately GoToWebinar is having a few technical problems. There will be a PDU. We'll give you the information at the end. It is being recorded. You'll get a link and you will get a copy of the slides as well. So I think that addresses most of the support questions that were coming in, and sorry about the video. All right, so let's get on with our next discussion topic. How do you know whether and when it's time to make the transition to a hybrid project management approach? Will, let's start off with you on this one.
Yeah, and thanks, Andy, because I kind of still thinking about the last topic. For me, the trigger for understanding this is really having your radar up for mental health and well-being. Because whenever that starts to ping, related to whichever approach you may be using, like just say you're coming out of a traditional waterfall shop, or you're a place that's really gone headlong into agile. Once you start to have any sort of struggles that really, that's affecting people in their day-to-day work, that's when you really need to consider approaching an introduction of hybrid and iterative, in my opinion. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Jeremiah, what about you at Delta?
Yeah, if we have a project that maybe we don't have a lot of data on yet, or there's a lot of exploratory work that's going to be required, maybe in the requirements gathering kind of phase, the define phase. I like to use the hybrid, particularly lean, like I said earlier. That's kind of the one that we tend to go to the most in my team. And maybe if you need like dedicated solution building, that requires a super big cross-functional team, I really, really like to move towards hybrid. Definitely scenario based though.
Frank, I suspect that you're going to agree with that idea of scenario based.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my experience, you determine your methodology project by project. If you're able to do a detailed intake up front and learn what type of project it is, that can inform or guide you on what the approach should be. If that's not the case, you still need to fit the approach to the project. You have to analyze what type of project it is. For example, if you're developing a shopping app, maybe hybrid would be best. If you're developing a financial system, Waterfall might be a better choice because there's all of the regulatory requirements and approvals that you have to go through. I mean, I'm assuming that most of us on this webinar have quite a bit of experience, so in most cases, you'll know what works best.
Excellent. I think that's a very good point to end it on. All right, so the next discussion question, I'm going to make you work for this today, guys. What are some of the biggest challenges that organizations can expect to face when they make this transition? And how can they get in front of those challenges and sort of deal with the prevention is better than cure? Alexis, we skipped you on the last one, and in your role, I suspect you're seeing a lot of different customer environments. So I'll start with you.
For sure. Thank you. So kind of going back to thinking about hybrid as waterfall and agile, if we think about waterfall as predictive, it's very well understood and very well adopted. Hybrid and agile are less familiar, and that lack of familiarity can create friction, especially when agile methodologies don't have, and I'm using air quotes, apologies, you can't see me on camera, but we don't have a done date when we think about Scrum or Kanban as a process. And that can upset stakeholders, especially if they're the ones who've made the financial investment in the project. They kind of want to know, well, when is this going to be done and when can I expect to realize value? So it's very important to be clear about the intention up front and then create the familiar guideposts for your stakeholders. So if you're using a hybrid approach, having key milestone dates that you're tracking to and providing line of sight to when benefits of your project are being delivered can really help temper some of the immediate resistance that comes from, what do you mean I don't have a done date? So again, and you'll hear me talk about change management a lot throughout the rest of this time. That is definitely where to start.
Excellent. Will, let's get your thoughts on this one.
And I'm based on what Alexis is saying, I'm thinking of the particular work that we do at SwampFox, where we've taken the stage gate process and put it as an overlay on top of the Scrum practices that are helping us get the benefit of iterating as a software product development house. We felt the tension years ago where when we weren't using agile methodologies, we would find scope creep and very long design phases in our erstwhile waterfall approach to software development that would get really cumbersome and lead to lots of problems downstream. So when we were able to hire our first Scrum Master and begin to actually use the right ceremonies and sprints, it was almost like the tension could relieve from that. But at the same time, as I mentioned before, we still have date drivers. And so the thing that is the key to me is to have all of the people who are involved in these processes acknowledging upfront the need to approach things from both angles, and then you can have the right conversation. So for me, communication is the key to make this work.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I think that it's interesting that the perception is that you can't have a set duration if you're using Agile. Of course, you can have a fixed number of sprints as long as you end up with a minimally viable product at the end of the last sprint. There's no reason why you can't time box those projects, but I know it's not a popular thought. But this isn't about me. Frank, tell us what you think.
Well, I found that the biggest challenge when making the transition is that in a matrix environment, where people are more used to waterfall and have to work on multiple projects, they have a harder time switching to hybrid because, like Agile, it requires at least some dedication of resources. This is something that they might not understand or even be prepared to do. The way around it is to explain to people why they need to dedicate time to the project up front. So it's really about education. In many places, it's a cultural shift for the organization. I think we all know that a lot of places say that they're agile or even hybrid, and they really aren't. It's up to us as the PMO to educate and guide an organization to where they think they already are sometimes.
Yes, now isn't that a challenge? All right, I can't beat that. So let's move on to the next topic. So panelists, do you have any stories or specific examples that you can share, polite please, of when taking a hybrid project management approach really enabled you to successfully strike a balance between predictability and adaptability? Alexis, something tells me you've got a really good story on this one.
I do, and it's actually my story. I made a pretty big misstep when I first tried to do this myself. So, years ago, I had been hearing about Scrum, so I went out and got certified as a certified Scrum product owner, and I was super excited to bring that back to my team. I got my engineers excited about it because they were going to have autonomy over their schedule. And we built our first project plan. And what I realized is 6 or 7 of my first sprints were all manufacturing lead time. So there was no actual work being done because we were just waiting for our supply chain or we were waiting for fabrication from one of our vendors. And so I realized I couldn't just wholly adopt agile or scrum in my use case. So we had to go back and re-architect that solution, and what we landed on was for those things that are heavily manufacturing dependent, we were able to use Waterfall. For the things that were design or software development related, we were able to use that more scrum methodology, and then me and my program managers pulled things together. So I call it a little bit of a misstep because we did start a project and then have to completely re-architect the the project plan, which took some time. But I think my takeaway from that is being willing to try things and take risks. Because even though we lost those couple of weeks while we sort of figured out the sweet spot between Waterfall and Scrum, we also gained a lot in terms of the flexibility that Scrum allowed us to have and really giving that autonomy back to the engineering team. So it was painful in the moment, but ended up being really worth it. So don't be afraid to take risks.
Excellent, thank you. Jeremiah, that seems like a perfect place to bring you in. Given your role, don't be afraid to take risks.
Yeah, risks good. Yeah, I can get on board with that in some things, but before I give an example, particularly in an operations world, there's a few things that I don't think hybrid strategies work very well on. Is safety actually comes to mind first. If you have a dedicated safety project or event that you need to tackle, I just personally don't think a hybrid works as well, or even certain regulatory categories. You just I don't know, just be careful with those too. But just we at least at Delta tend to stick with traditional project management in those categories. But for hybrid, I do have a story, and it's here at TechOps when we were developing a new engine repair line. And so it was a scenario. It was a project where we knew most of the requirements, but the nitty gritty we were a little fuzzy on, and had to rally a pretty big cross functional team around that. So what we ended up using was a few sprints to get those requirements established and develop some Smartsheet tools. And then we had several lean Kaizen events to set up production layouts and determine some tooling requirements within the physical production space. And then all of those different events rolled up under a stage gate project plan where we essentially used that to stay accountable to our milestones, our budget, and our leadership team. So they definitely had to work together.
Excellent, thank you. Frank, I'm sure you've got some stories in your long and illustrious career.
Oh yeah, no, thank you, and yeah, no, I've got some, but so this one in particular was at another organization, not Securitas. But we had a project to develop a new website. Uh, a new team was hired specifically to do this, and they were allowed to run the project outside of the PMO. So you can already see where this is going, right? They
Oh
had
yeah.
six, yeah, yeah. So they had 6 months to do this. A year later, they hadn't delivered anything. So they called in the PMO, and we were asked to run the project. At the time, when we stepped in, they were running straight waterfall, and again, they delivered nothing because they kept making changes to the requirements. They were scope creep. It's a tale as old as time. In fact, I think Jeremiah was mentioning that before, some of the problems with waterfall. Um, I transitioned them over to a more hybrid approach so they could incrementally make progress, and we could show that progress to leadership. I was also running QA at the time, so I was able to assign testing resources and create a small dedicated team. So after all that, I forecasted that we would be complete in about 3 months. We finished the project in 3 months and 2 weeks.
So you were still late, is what you're
We
saying?
were, we were, we were just a little bit late. Yes, yes. Thank you for highlighting that. I have
Well,
the
I feel I have a duty. All right, so let's go to our next discussion topic, and let me play a little bit of devil's advocate here, because yes, I accept hybrid is an amazing project portfolio management tactic, but I'm sure there's people listening to us now who are going, yeah, that's fine, but, and there is no such thing as a silver bullet, there's no perfect solution. So, what are some of the limitations of a hybrid approach, and how can teams successfully navigate them in order to still be successful overall? Frank, let's throw it back to you to start with.
Thanks. Yeah, I think when an organization isn't used to a hybrid approach, it can be complicated. People understand waterfall, and people think they understand agile. They're established frameworks. When you throw hybrid at them, it can be a weird, confusing mishmash of the two, and people will want to stick to what they're used to already. I think that's a limitation. Hybrid isn't necessarily as clear as the other methodologies, and I think the way around this is setting expectations very early. A good project manager with the backing of a good PMO can explain how the project is going to run. They can provide examples of artifacts and ceremonies, and they can show how the approaches are going to be combined. It's really all about education and making sure everybody understands their role on the project for any methodology, but specifically hybrid, the PM has to take the driver's seat because they have the complete understanding of how it's all going to work and come together. They need to lead the team through whatever the process is.
Excellent, thank you. Will, I want to get your thoughts on this one because you've got such a unique role on our panel in that you've got the PMO accountability, but also HR and finance. So that gives you a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for that segue into it for me, Andy, because I think that the learning that I've had in wearing those multiple hats is kind of key to hopefully giving the hybrid approach the best chance for success at Swamp Fox. Because I find myself uh, doing exactly what Frank is talking about relative to communication, and it even starts with like onboarding new resources. This communication and really trying to enable whether it's a product developer or a designer or a professional services implementer or even a project manager or an account manager, having everybody understand the answers to the two key questions when you're taking a hybrid approach. One of them is why waterfall is useful at all in your hybrid approach. And the other is why Scrum is useful at all. And once you get the resources to be able to answer those questions pretty succinctly, then you're enabling everybody to have discussions about where you need to flex back and forth. Because sometimes you need to even change things how you're doing it from project to project. You may have set a template, you may have a stage gate overlay like we do, or you may have the ability to flex towards a customer that wants you to participate in a professional services engagement that has their own sprint ceremonies within it, but you've got to know the reason why it's useful. So making sure that your own organization's reasons and logic for the utility of the iterative or hybrid approach is really key.
Excellent, thank you. Alexis, this seems like a golden opportunity for you to talk about your favorite topic.
I was going to ask if I've said change management yet. Um, But yes, very important. And I think taking a long look at why you're considering a hybrid approach is very important. I think, especially in the project management community, we tend to hear of successes of various things, and we go, "Oh, I want to try that." Myself, as an example, I just talked about the story where I went and got a whole certification because I was so excited about it. But we have to take into consideration what else is happening in the organization. Is hybrid the right approach, or is it just the hot topic of the moment? Do we have the budget to do training and enablement and sustainment the way that we need to? And then taking all of those variables into consideration, how is this going to affect the day to day of the people who actually have to then execute? So understanding how they will be affected and giving them a voice in the process. So, not just saying, hey, I went and got this certification, so I know best, which I may or may not have been guilty of on multiple occasions in my career, um, but helping and gathering that boots on the ground view of how this is actually going to play out in real life. It does take longer, but it is absolutely worth the investment of time. I have seen teams try to do widespread agile transformation and not taking into consideration the culture and the environment and everything else that's already going on is a massive delay. And what ends up happening is people end up thinking agile doesn't work. And it's not that, it's that we didn't consider all the other variables before we threw that into our methodology or our process. So it's a huge undertaking and it does require the requisite consideration.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you for sharing that you've had plenty of learning opportunities like the rest of us. Frank, I think you had another point you wanted to make on this one.
Yeah. Just to kind of piggyback off what Alexis was saying. I mean, as an example of maybe when or when not to use this based on culture and what's going on. We started a project with a hard deadline that was being called agile, but was really more of a hybrid project. After taking a look at the project, the PMO stepped in and we decided against an agile approach because of the time that it would take to educate everybody on that process. Because it can be bumpy the first time you try a new methodology, and some people on the team hadn't really experienced that yet. So we made a conscious decision to use a more structured waterfall approach instead, and we found that worked better.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, and next question, and just remind everybody, we are getting towards the end. We've still got a couple of questions to go. We are getting towards the end of our discussion section. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in. There are a lot of questions already, so I can't promise we'll get to everything. But if we capture all your questions, we'll make sure that we share everything with the panelists and nothing will get lost. All right, let's get on with this next topic. What are the tools and technologies that are the most helpful for powering a hybrid project management approach in your experience? Jeremiah, let's start with you on this one.
Great. Yeah. What I found to be really successful is having a core set of tools that you probably use nearly every project, and then building onto that as you need. It really, what we've seen is here at TechOps, it's been building a sense of confidence in those tools and the methodology at large. Hey, we're using this tool again. I know what that means. Let's use it. It's great. So the three tools that I really like to use are value stream mapping, typically, with some visualization tool, maybe like Miro or Microsoft Visio. And then we also use a lot of RASCI or RACI charts. And then we use Smartsheets quite heavily for data visualization and lots of project tracking. So we've seen really big growth in just our project management approaches and adoption by the greater parties here at TechOps, simply by consistently using these tools. So it's been really good for our confidence.
Excellent. And it makes this old man very happy that you're still using RASCI and RACI charts that I was trained on when I was young and dinosaurs
We love
walked
them.
the earth. Yeah,
Oh
it's
yeah.
great. I'm not completely obsolete yet. On the subject of not completely obsolete, Will.
Thanks. Yeah, we use Smartsheet incessantly. Again, going back to the multiple roles that I play in our organization, uh, early on, kind of somewhat unusually, even though we adopted Smartsheet for project management purposes, I quickly found it to be a vital financial tool for the organization. So all of our key financial information is already in Smartsheet as the sort of the bastion of single sources of truth across different domains. So across professional services and product, whether it's a customer engagement project or the stage gate process overlay that I've talked about already, we use Smartsheet across all of those. We're leveraging dashboards, reports, all the automations, the collaborative stuff that's within that. But we also have tools that the developers are using because they are coders. So we're using a lot of Jira and Confluence for knowledge management, issue tracking, coding that goes into GitHub and things like that. And we boil out the high level results of things that are in those tools that are more oriented towards the agile approach of our business into Smartsheet for reporting purposes or tracking as well. We also use a lot of tools like Slack and Zoom all the time to just stay in communication. But I think that's the key for me, is that if all these tools contribute to better communication among and through your teams, then that's the key point of making them work for a hybrid approach.
Excellent, thank you. Alexis, given your role, I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that maybe you use Smartsheet a little bit.
Why would you think that?
Call
Yes,
it a wild
I,
guess.
I actually build solutions for hybrid project management in Smartsheet as a side hustle. So yes, I would say that I definitely lean heavily on Smartsheet. And there's definite merit in the other tools mentioned. I think visualization tools like Lucid and Miro for iterative planning are phenomenal. Guidance that no one asked for, though, is when you're considering your tool stack, it's important not to create too much redundancy. So, looking at functionality and making sure that we're picking the tools that are going to be augmenting the process and not adding to the process.
I think that's a very good point. Yeah. Frank, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, here we use Teams, Zoom, and Smartsheet, but I think whatever tool you use, you need to build your process first. The tool is secondary to the process. Now we found a tool, and in this case, it's Smartsheet, that was flexible enough that we could build it around our process. I mean, it's also flexible enough to grow and change as our process matures and changes.
I think that's critical. Yeah, you want a tool that adapts to how you want to work. You don't want to have to adapt how you work to the limitations of the tool. That's a great point, Frank.
Mhm.
All right, so let's get on to our final question before we get to the Q&A. What are some ways that project portfolio management leaders can measure and improve the effectiveness of this approach, this methodology? Frank, let's throw it back to you to start with.
Great, yeah, thanks. I think the best way forward really requires three things. You need a well-defined process, a project manager that really understands and is capable of guiding people through that process, and you need the ability to be transparent. So first, if you don't have a solid process, you're going to have chaos. And the process should be flexible so that you can react to changes, since every project is different and life happens, but you should have a solid foundation that everyone can understand. Second, you need a good project manager or a PMO that can lead. And I really want to emphasize the word lead people through the process. Not everyone can do this. This requires both running the project and educating people on the process. And that's not easy. And then finally, you need to be transparent. This can be tricky because it can be difficult to see progress sometimes. Agile or hybrid approaches can make it hard to gauge where you are, since they're very fluid and iterative. Waterfall makes it easy to see exactly where you are, but you give up things like speed. Any way you go, you need a tool that lets you gather metrics to see where you are on the project and then provide it out to the team. The team and leadership have to see what's going on. Communication, reporting, and control of the project are incredibly important.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Will, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I don't think I could say anything really better than what Frank just said about the efficiency of the process that you would drive within, making it effective within your organization. So I'm gonna approach this a little bit differently and say I think that the way that everybody who's attending this webinar can really add on top of what Frank was talking about is to lean into community. And there's probably a bunch of people on this webinar who are chuckling to themselves because they may be familiar with the last few years of hyperactivity I've spent in the Smartsheet community. But it's been to my own benefit because there's so many experts that are outside your own organization that are very easy to tap into to find best practices like the ones that we're talking about today. And I would even go so far as to say, I bet that the four of us, I'm definitely speaking for myself here on this panel, would make ourselves available to each and every person as an individual on here. So make sure you're following us on LinkedIn and all that stuff because there's resources out there among us and the greater communities that are related to the tools, to project management, like the Institute itself and all the organizations that are out there that you really should tap into when you're considering these approaches. Again, coming back to that communication, you need to test what you're doing within your organization outside your organization. So my big admonition is to tap into community.
Excellent. That's a wonderful offer, Will, especially given how many people are registered for this webinar. You're going to be busy.
I love it.
Alexis, let's get your thoughts on this one. I think you might have a chance to say those two words again.
Yes, change management. Also, I would like to heavy plus one to what Frank and Will said. Those are incredible call outs. The only other thing I would add to that is don't lose your people. We have to be willing when we are implementing a change like this or a strategy like this to listen to the ongoing feedback and make sure that feedback is bi-directional. Hint, you can do this with Smartsheet forms, but making sure that there is a mechanism for not only what the feedback is, but what the response to that feedback is. When people feel like they're heard and their changes are either implemented or at least considered, it does make the solution more sticky, and you can create some tremendous advocates by listening to people. So don't lose them along the way. It's very important.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Jeremiah, I'll give you the last word on this one.
Great, thanks. Yeah. One thing that's really just kind of interesting in my operations world, hybrid is so flexible and it's really, really useful in that aspect. But one of the biggest things in our operations world is standard work, which is oftentimes not flexible, but they work really well together. And I believe that if you increase the focus on standard work, both operational standard work, project focused standard work, it's going to help things become more effective. This is probably going to sound cliche, but standard work helps our teams know what to expect. And then from a leadership side and a project management side, it helps to know what to inspect and what questions to ask. And so we've been trying to do that here at TechOps, and having that focus on adhering to the process, even if you're not making clear maybe progress, has really been critical for us. If you don't have a process, even a flexible one, then you may want to consider making one. If you can't tell, I'm a big process guy. So in the operations world, you got to focus on processes first. From there, we measure the risk and then address it via project management. So measuring the risk is really one of the key ways we look at things. And then the last thing I'll say is, if a project's not affecting the bottom line or improving cycle time or something like that, we have a really hard time getting it across the starting line. And so having a really well-defined impact on the business from a project is really, really critical. And defining those measurements even before a project begins, you can go ahead and do that too at the beginning.
Excellent, thank you. And I have to say, given the role that you have, and given that I'm going to be taking several flights in the next few weeks, I'm really glad you're a process guy. All
Hear,
right.
hear.
So in addition to a side hustle of building solutions in Smartsheet and being an active participant in this discussion, Alexis, you've been taking notes and you have some takeaways for us to lead us into the Q&A.
I have impressive that I've already formatted them on this slide too. Um, so three things. Don't dive in head first. We have to be thoughtful about change management and be honest about where your organization is and whether they're ready to undertake this effort. And then if not, let's be specific about the steps needed to get there. Two, take it project by project. I think it was mentioned earlier that this is really a project-centric approach, and so you have to evaluate each project on its own merit and determine whether or not hybrid is the right approach. And then communication is key. Clearly and consistently explain why this approach is being used, set those stakeholder expectations, and be open to team feedback.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, with that, we're going to transition straight into the Q&A because we do have quite a few of them. And I'm not going to necessarily get everybody's thoughts on every single question because I do want to make sure we get through as many questions as possible. But let me throw this first one. Will, let's give this one to you. Do you have any thoughts or any comments on how organizations can shift that mindset from a plan-driven waterfall, whatever you want to call it, traditional approach to a more agile or hybrid way of doing work? Because it is a little bit of a mindset and a cultural shift as well as sort of a process one, right?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And to me, the first thing that my brain jumps to is how beneficial it was for us to hire into our organization an experienced Scrum Master who knew all of the philosophical principles of an agile approach. We also, over the last few years, have hired in some software developers who come from shops where that was already adopted. So it's good to sort of mix the pool of backgrounds and to whether that's within your own organization or as I was saying in the answer to the last question, finding experts outside of your organization to come educate you on, what the guiding principles of those philosophies are, but at the same time acknowledging that you may not be jumping into it, you know, whole kit. You may need to pick and choose what works and to talk to people who have done that, which is what we've been talking about this entire webinar is saying, like for us, for example, for SwampFox, it was how can you make sprints really effective to solve some of the problems that cause anguish within your development team and let things go through demo cycles and QA testing cycles in a way that everybody can feel the success of what they're moving, even though there may be some larger overlay that's maybe a longer time frame to get a larger set of features out to the marketplace. So figuring out what's the best for your particular business model, kind of going back to Frank's exhortation for all of us to plan really well and understand our processes before deciding the tools. I think that's the key.
Excellent, thank you. Jeremiah, I'm going to throw this one at you because of the industry that you work in. This is somebody who's working in a different highly regulated industry, potentially just as regulated as yours. And they're saying that their executives are pushing for them to embrace a few more agile concepts into their more plan-driven projects. But the ask isn't very clear. It seems a bit counterintuitive given the regulatory and documentary nature of a lot of the work and the fixed dates. And just wondered what your thoughts were in how you can help the executives be a little bit clearer in their ask and what perhaps the best way to start a journey exploring this might be.
Yeah, great question. And this would be in my world where I would jump straight towards some sort of mind mapping or value stream map approach. And if you have a project with some loose requirements, probably go ahead and structure it in maybe a waterfall or stage gate type structure, and then use some of the more agile or lean tools to gather those requirements. So I love using value stream maps. I think it's a very useful tool, and you can use that to not only train the executive team to understand what the tools might be useful for, but also gather requirements at the same time. So that would be my recommendation, value stream mapping. There's so many good consultants out there that can help you lead those events if you're not able or comfortable to do that in-house. But it's a useful tool. I love it.
Excellent, thank you. Frank, we haven't put you on the spot yet, so here's what you do. How do you overcome resistance and gain support from specifically stakeholders Somebody is saying that they've got some real challenges in a couple of areas, but stakeholders was one of the things they mentioned.
Yeah, brute force, just brute force. I think that the best way, because again, when you come into something new like this, especially if it's something that's new for an organization, like hybrid or agile, so on. I mean, most people are familiar with Waterfall. So when you kind of throw something like that at them, it can be really confusing. And I think a lot of it is sitting down and explaining to them what the process is going to be and explain to them what the benefits of that process is. You're going to be able to get things faster. We're going to be able to, we're going to be able to move a little bit more quickly. We're going to be able to deliver things out to our users a little faster. But what I found that's worked in the past is that we've set up education sessions where we've taken people through, okay, look, this is how this is what Agile is all about. This is how it's going to work for this organization, or at least this is how we think it's going to work for this organization. These are the roles, and if you're going to be on a project like this, if you're in this role, this is what you have to do, and so on. So it's really just getting people to be very, very comfortable and really understand what it is that you're about to do. And I think that the other piece, which I touched on before too, is that you've really got to, from a PMO perspective and a project manager perspective, those people in that they really have to know what they're talking about, because I think people are going to be looking to those people for guidance. And if you're wobbly on what how we're going to run this project, you're going to lose the team, and you're going to lose the stakeholders are going to they're going to it'll ultimately end up being chaos. So I think those things are ways to get past like maybe some hesitant stakeholders.
Excellent, thank you. Alexis, you're not escaping either. So
Oh
you
man.
see, I know, so unfair of me. You see a lot of different organizations. So you see different ways for this being implemented. There's a question of somebody saying, what works in an environment that is very highly matrix based without necessarily dedicated resources? How do you make hybrid work there that doesn't necessarily align itself with the idea of a matrix organization and conflicting potentially reporting lines?
Oof. That's a great and very tough question.
I didn't say it would be easy, Alexis.
um, I think we've kind of touched on a lot of it. The communication then becomes extremely important in this type of environment. So I believe Will was talking about racy charts, but understanding who all of your people are. So if I lean on my change management expertise, stakeholder analysis that defines who are the relevant stakeholders across the organization, where they are, and what their communication needs are, and then overlaying your communication strategy to those needs in those environments. Sometimes you're going to have to communicate more with one group over another because they either have greater accountability for the end state of the project or because they are showing more resistance to the project. And so you may have to work with them a little bit differently than you would your PMO, for instance. So the communication strategy is really important. And I think when we talk about hybrid, we talk about the methodology for the execution of a project, but that doesn't negate the need for all of the other stuff that you have to do to make a project or program successful. So
Yeah.
final answer, communication.
And let me just jump in on Alexis there and say retrospectives and this concept of pre-mortems, right? Instead of doing a post-mortem, if you get the stakeholders together to talk about what could go wrong in your upcoming projects that you're taking a new approach to, then that just gets everybody enrolled and everybody feels like they're engaged because they are in the success of the projects that you're trying, especially at first. So I think those two things go with the communication and the enrollment of all the people.
Excellent. All right, thank you. I'm going to get everyone to comment on this next one because I think you all have slightly different approaches to it. The really simple question, answer might not be quite so simple, but when you embrace hybrid, what's the implications for portfolio management? Jeremiah, you're my new best friend because you like racy, even if Alexis said it was Will. So I'll let you go
Sorry.
first.
Well, Andy, we've mentioned RACI charts now 2 times in 1 hour. That must be a record.
And no, I feel so relevant.
The hardest thing for us in the portfolio management conversation here at TechOps is understanding metrics when you have multiple projects using different approaches and different even hybrid approaches. We might have agile and IT teams using totally different approaches than the production teams in lean, and having a very clear understanding of the metrics on the front end has been one of the challenges we face. We're still not there yet. And so what we have found is rolling things up. We can't have standard metrics where they roll up in a common way to a portfolio level. We have kind of buckets of standard metrics. And so understanding that at the get-go so that you're not confusing, hey, why aren't you reporting this, or where's the information for that? That has been something that we're still battling today.
Excellent. Thank you. Frank, your thoughts on the portfolio angle?
Yeah, I mean, in my role, portfolio reporting is a big part of what I do. But and that's why, I mean, again, if I have a preference, I'm always going to lean toward Waterfall, because Waterfall, it's super easy to know exactly where you are on a project. But when you start getting into to agile and hybrid, it does make it a lot more complex. It's not impossible, but and again, I think the way that we address it here is that we make sure that if a team is developing in a more agile way, we still set timelines and say, okay, listen, there has to be a demo here and so on, and we need to be aware of when those things are going to happen. And as the project manager has to know, what's going to be in that scrum, what you're moving to the next, what you're moving to the next sprint. Sorry, what you're moving from sprint to sprint, if you do have to move things. So it's really just continuing to ensure that there are checkpoints and milestones that we can report on, regardless of the methodology that you use. You still have to be able to report information out. So again, that falls on us as a PMO and as the project manager to make sure that information is flowing.
Excellent. Thank you. Alexis, your thoughts on the portfolio management impact?
I echo everything that's already been stated. I think to the extent that you can standardize across and make sure that folks are relatively aligned, understanding metrics are going to be different across different programs and different departments within a portfolio, but having a common language and defining a common understanding of the big things. I've seen teams that can't even agree on what a project means. So making sure that your big things, what does health for a project mean? What is a project? What is a program? What is a risk? And communicating those so that they're clearly understood across the portfolio, super important. And to the extent that you can standardize where you can, and then the delta becomes the things that you report sort of independently on.
Excellent. Thank you. Will, if you don't mind, I'm going to skip over you on this one because I have another question that I want to try and squeeze in the couple of minutes we got left that specifically applies to you. I know you do a lot of professional services work there at Swamp Fox, and this is a question around any unique challenges or considerations when applying this hybrid approach to service-based industries.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that kind of goes back to something that was said at the very beginning of the webinar around what happens when you have a finite set of resources and you're trying to, look at an approach like Agile or Scrum. We share resources because we're not a huge company. We're not tiny, but we also don't have, just a big bench of resources to apply to backlogs, for example, in the Scrum approach to things. So we have to be really cognizant of what's happening when. And so it kind of goes back to the last topic, even though you were moving me on to the next one, which is how do you share the information and show it in a way that's uniform when you're taking this hybrid approach. And for me, like I kind of want to jump to the tools for a second and show how that can be useful because, we may be putting KPIs and metrics and things on certain layers for what's happening in product development that's more agile oriented. So there may be things that we're using Jira for that show burn down charts or movement across boards. that aren't really looked at a portfolio level. But we do need to have a scorecard view of everything that's going on so that it can integrate with the company's top-down view of what's happening. You know, as the finance guy, I'm looking at the company as at least one P&L too. So I have to see what's happening in our professional services engagements that are maybe a little bit more uniform with each other than they are with the product development efforts. But when I can put all the metrics into widgets and dashboards and reports that show up in a familiar format to people, then understanding the whole picture and the whole story is easier. So yet again, it goes back to communication and making sure you're being as transparent as you can in each of those engagements. And so that's really key for the professional services side of our house to be successful as we're moving through, you know, the time bound demands of those engagements.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I wish we had time to continue. We have a load of questions that we haven't had a chance to get to. I'm sorry, everyone, that we didn't get to your question, but we have captured everything. Nothing will be lost. Thank you all for attending. Thank you all to our panelists for such an engaging discussion, thoughtful Q&A session, and most particularly for putting up with me. And we hope to see all of you again soon in the next webinar. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.